You wake up to a sound you don't recognize, metal grating against stone. The ground beneath you is cold, uneven, and smells faintly of ash and oil. There is no bed, no pillow, no concept of comfort, only a shackle around your ankle, connected to the wall by a rusted chain. Someone barks a command in Latin, a language you don't understand, but your body does. Instinctively, you sit up. You're not dreaming. You're in 64 CE, the reign of Emperor Nero. You're in the countryside outside Rome, and you are not a person. You are property. A servant? Number servants have wages. You're a service, a Roman slave, without rights, without identity. Your name has no legal standing. Your life has no fixed value. You belong to someone else, like a chair or a bucket. A guard yanks you up by the arm, his expression utterly blank, as if you were meat that needs to move. You're handed a woven basket and a pair of sandals with the leather so stiff it scrapes your heel open with the first step. No one tells you what to do. You follow the others through a narrow corridor toward a vineyard. The day has begun, and for you, it doesn't end until the sun dies. Slavery in ancient Rome wasn't a side effect of war, it was an institution, an industry. According to records by the Roman historian Livy, more than 30% of Rome's population were slaves during the height of the empire. You weren't necessarily captured in battle. You could have been born into it, sold by a desperate parent, or caught in one of Rome's many slaving expeditions in Africa, Gaul, or Judea. Today, you're assigned to agricultural labor. That sounds mild, until you realize it means 13 straight hours of hauling grape crates, hoeing dry earth under the summer sun, and receiving commands through gestures and threats. There's no water unless it's granted, no rest unless it's earned, no safety unless you become invisible. And if you don't? Well, let's just say the man next to you, a Thracian with a busted shoulder, made the mistake of speaking out of turn. You watch as he's dragged toward the villa's central column, a tall wooden post used for punishments. There's no ceremony, no trial, just 3 lashes and silence. The kind of silence that makes your stomach turn. Here's your first mystery. Despite all this horror, records show that some Roman slaves petitioned to remain in bondage rather than be freed. A strange choice, until you realize that being freed didn't mean being accepted. It meant being stateless, nameless, jobless, a freedman without land or kin. So yes, you might survive. But at what cost? By midday, your hands have blistered. The skin peels back without blood. It's too dry. You're breathing in dust so thick, it coats your throat. You make the mistake of pausing, just once, to wipe your eyes. A small stone hits your shoulder, thrown by another slave, not a guard. No one can afford to be seen as weak, especially not beside you. Here's your historical anchor. In Pompeii, archaeologists discovered a preserved inscription etched into a villa wall. It listed slave names, their job functions, and their productivity ranks, using Roman numerals. No birth dates, no homes, just a classification system not unlike a spreadsheet. One name stood out. Felix, ranked fate, meaning 8th best among the winemakers. A man remembered not for who he was, but for how many amphorae he filled. You don't know your rank. You don't know if you'll live long enough to matter. But something strange begins to happen. You start to copy the rhythm of those around you. You drop your shoulders at the right times. You mimic the subtle nods that mean, "I heard you." You start to understand. This is a world with its own unwritten grammar, a language of fear. The philosopher Seneca, Nero's own advisor, once wrote that, "No slave is truly a slave unless he chooses to be." But that's easy to say when you sleep in silk. As the sun lowers and the shadows stretch across the field, you begin to wonder, is this you now? Is this all there is? Historians still debate whether Roman slaves retained a personal sense of self or gradually dissolved into function. It's a contested space between anthropology and psychology, but you feel the answer in your chest, in the numbness that spreads not from injury, but from the slow erosion of identity. And that's the scariest part. The violence is predictable, the exhaustion is calculable, but the disappearance of your inner voice, that's the true nightmare. And remember, this is only the first few hours. By now, your arms no longer ache, they just don't respond. The pain has become a kind of background music, playing softly beneath the louder symphony of commands, footfalls, and wooden tools scraping against soil. You don't feel like you're part of anything human anymore. You feel like a gear, replaceable, interchangeable, purpose-built for someone else's momentum. But this isn't chaos, it's not barbarism, it's worse, it's a system. Ancient Roman slavery operated like a machine built by law, refined by culture, and enforced by silence. Every cog had its place, and you are in it now. Unlike the transatlantic slavery that came centuries later, Roman slavery was not determined by race. It was structured by legal status, which made it all the more dangerous, because anyone could fall into it, lose a war, owe a debt, be born in the wrong place. The law didn't protect you. In fact, the law defined you as res, a thing. You weren't a citizen, nor a foreigner, nor an animal. You were property, with no right to marriage, no ability to own anything, and no voice in court. The Lex Alia Sentia, passed in 4 CE, explicitly governed how and when slaves could be freed, but more importantly, how they couldn't. For instance, no slave under 30 could be freed unless it was proven they'd earned it. And even if you were freed, you didn't become Roman. You became a freedman, libertus, with permanent social limitations. You were always marked. The law even outlined punishments for masters who killed their slaves without cause. That might sound like protection until you realize what it implies. That slaves could be killed, just not arbitrarily. In other words, your survival wasn't a right. It was a privilege granted at the whim of your owner. You notice something today. No one looks up. Not the slaves, not the overseers. Even when the sun crests the hills in that Roman golden hue, like a god smiling down, no one meets its gaze. Looking up feels rebellious. It implies you have a future. You don't. Historical records tell us about Tiro, a slave who served the famous Roman philosopher Cicero. Tiro wasn't just literate. He invented a form of shorthand to transcribe speeches and later compiled Cicero's letters. He was eventually freed, yes, but only after years of intellectual servitude. Even the lucky slaves, the ones with education, indoor work, and access to libraries, were still tools. You're not Tiro, you're anonymous. And that's the norm. The Roman world was divided into very specific strata, and slaves were at the bottom. But even within slavery, there were hierarchies. Familia urbana, household slaves, better clothed, but always under watch. Familia rustica, field slaves, what you are now. Harsh labor, low visibility, no path out. Familia gladiatoria, slaves trained for combat and spectacle. A short, bloody path to public admiration or death. You start to notice how the guards walk differently, depending on which type of slave they're near. They strut near the gladiators, bark near the field workers, and speak softly but firmly near the house slaves. The machine adjusts itself by role, even in its cruelty. Here's your strange fact. Despite the brutal conditions, some Roman slaves were made to swear oaths of loyalty, binding them to masters emotionally, not just physically. In one preserved oath found in Egypt, a slave vows to protect my master from all harm and never speak ill of his name. Imagine being forced to pledge devotion to the hand that holds your chain. But the most chilling part? Many believed it. Not because they were stupid, but because hope is the most dangerous survival tool. If you believe loyalty might grant you mercy, you'll cling to it. If you believe obedience might one day earn you freedom, you'll protect your master from your own anger. The system didn't just capture your body, it co-opted your will. Scholars still debate whether the Roman legal apparatus around slavery was primarily economic, cultural, or psychological in nature. Was it designed merely to generate labor, or to reshape the very notion of identity? The laws weren't just tools of control, they were instruments of assimilation. They didn't just punish resistance, they erased the idea that resistance was even possible. You remember something from earlier today, when you saw that young girl, barely old enough to carry a basket, being corrected for walking too slowly. No one said a word. Not her, not you, not the others. It wasn't that they didn't care. It was that the machine had trained them not to respond. Now you understand. This silence is engineered. It's not emptiness, it's pressure. And it's working. The sun has lost its edge now. It no longer stings your skin. It just presses against it, heavy and impersonal, like a damp wool blanket you can't shrug off. Your limbs move, but not because you tell them to. They move because they remember what happens when they don't. By this point, your thoughts have thinned out like mist. There's no room in your mind for rebellion or grief. Only sequence, only task, only rhythm. You haven't said a word all day. The human body is adaptable, terrifyingly so. After just a few hours, your hands have stopped protesting. The blisters? They've sealed under dirt. Your shoulders stopped begging for relief long ago. They now beg for forgetfulness. You begin to accept things that this morning would have shattered you. The groans of another slave collapsing behind you no longer register as emergency. They are simply background. But your mind is what's changing fastest. You begin to lose track of time because there is no variation to mark it. The sun arcs, the sweat falls, the tasks repeat. Every hour is the same hour. The absence of novelty erodes memory. You stop thinking about what came before, and you certainly don't imagine what comes after. This is how the machine reprograms you, not by punishment, by repetition. And here's the most dangerous part. You start to comply before you're even told. There's a moment, just a flicker. You're instructed to carry a water jar, large, ceramic, with rope handles. You stumble. The jar smashes. Terracotta everywhere. The world freezes. The guard approaches, but doesn't strike you. Instead, he speaks to another slave. They clean up the mess. He moves on. And just like that, your breath returns. You're not punished. You're not hurt. But you're not relieved. Because what you feel isn't gratitude. It's guilt. You're ashamed you wasted his time. You're angry that you made trouble. You find yourself wishing you'd been more careful. And in that moment, you realize you've internalized it. You're no longer afraid of punishment. You're afraid of being noticed. In 104 BCE, a Roman equestrian named Lucius Junius Brutus left behind a letter describing his household management system. Among the entries was a chilling note. Replace 2 vineyard slaves, insufficient yield during midday shift. No names, no reason beyond productivity. That line stayed buried for centuries in a private collection in Ravenna. It was discovered only recently during the digitization of aristocratic archives. Scholars who studied it didn't debate its authenticity. They debated whether the slaves were reassigned or executed. You don't know which fate is worse, because in this world, either is administered with the same tone of indifference. And then, the strange begins to feel normal. You start to hum. Not a song, exactly. Just a repetition of sound. A pattern that keeps your pace. It's not for joy. It's for timing. for calibration. You watch a boy no older than 10 do the same as he carries clay tiles across the courtyard. He hums in a minor key, his lips barely moving. It's not music, it's survival. Someone sneezes. No one says bless you. There's no room for ritual here. The idea of kindness starts to feel like a relic from a myth you once believed in. Here's a truth rarely printed in textbooks. In some Roman households, slaves were forced to smile when in public view. Manuals of conduct even instructed slaves on how much eye contact to maintain with freemen. Too little, and you were accused of being evasive. Too much, and you were insolent. It wasn't just your labor they owned, it was your posture, your volume, your expression. You begin to sense the shape of the invisible rules. And worse, you begin to obey them without thinking. This is no longer about survival, it's about erasure. You catch your reflection, barely, in the metal basin used to rinse olives. Your face is still there, but unrecognizable. Not just dirt, not just fatigue. Something deeper has shifted. Your mouth no longer holds your accent. Your eyes have dulled into compliance. It hits you like a whisper from the inside. You're not sure what your own voice sounds like anymore. This isn't about pain. Pain is sharp, temporary, loud. This is about absence, the loss of internal dialogue, the flattening of yourself. You're being hollowed out. And the world isn't doing it violently, it's doing it efficiently. You remember, for a flicker of a second, who you were, what you liked, the way a cup of warm drink used to make your fingers feel alive. But even that memory feels foreign now, like a scene from someone else's life. You're beginning to suspect that freedom, in this place, wouldn't feel like flying. It would feel like amnesia. Because to be free again, you'd have to remember who you were. And right now, you don't. The day ends not with a sunset, but with a whistle. Sharp, short, meaningless. A sound not unlike the ones used to train animals. You're herded back into the stone-walled quarters, the door slamming behind you with the kind of finality that no one bothers to comment on. No one talks, no one complains. There is no communal exhaustion, only solitary surrender. And that's when you notice it. Not what's happening now, but what's not happening. There are no prayers, no songs, no conversations about what tomorrow might bring. Because the only guarantee in this place is repetition. And repetition doesn't need a witness. You curl up in a corner, hugging your knees, trying to anchor yourself to some memory of who you once were. But it doesn't come. What does come is a different thought, a foreign one, uninvited, and more terrifying than pain. This is just how the world works. That's when the machine wins, not when it breaks your back, but when it convinces you that the weight belongs there. Let's pull back. Let's exit the simulation. You've spent one day, just 24 hours, in the skin of a Roman slave. And now, standing back in the safety of your own time, the air around you should feel cleaner, lighter. But it doesn't, does it? Because the terrifying truth is this: not everything from that world stayed in the past. You remember that record from Lucius Junius Brutus, the man who replaced his slaves based on yield? Well, in 2021, an Amazon warehouse manager in Illinois was fired for altering productivity quotas to allow workers extra time for bathroom breaks. The software had flagged him for inefficiency. Different language, same logic. The tools may have changed, rods for RFID scanners, overseers for algorithms, but the philosophy remains eerily familiar. Your worth is your output. And when your output dips, your humanity becomes negotiable. You're probably thinking, yes, but we're not slaves now. We have rights, choices. True. But how many of those choices are shaped by systems that ask for obedience before understanding? How often do you find yourself moving, not because you want to, but because you're supposed to? Waking at a specific hour, standing in lines, smiling when told, saying nothing when something feels wrong, because saying something might cost you more than it's worth. Sound familiar? In 1994, a historian named Mary Beard noted that Rome never really fell. It just shifted, morphed, echoed. She wasn't speaking of armies or emperors. She was speaking of habits, of inherited structure. Because sometimes, the most dangerous legacies aren't the ones you see. They're the ones that feel normal. You might not wear chains, but if you need permission to rest, if your name is replaced by a username or badge, if the system would rather you be productive than present, then maybe, just maybe, you're closer to yesterday than you think. There's no grand rebellion at the end of this day, no Spartacus moment, no cinematic escape, because in reality, most didn't escape. Most lived, and then died, in silence, in order, in service of something they never got to define. And here you are. You got out. You can stand up, shake off the dust, return to a world that, at least on paper, calls you free. But the memory lingers, not of the labor, but of the slow erosion of self. That's the part no one warns you about, not the whips, not the hunger, but how easy it is to vanish while still breathing. So the next time you feel your voice shrinking in a room, or your will bending to something you never chose, ask yourself this: is this survival, or is this obedience? And would a Roman slave even be able to tell the difference?